The morning Kale Morrow first saw her, the street was wet with last night's rain, and the gutter was running brown with mud, and she was sitting on the curb in front of the collapsed transit shelter with her mobility frame half buried in the debris, and her 4 lower limbs folded beneath her in a way that looked wrong, looked painful, looked like something had given out and hadn't come back. He almost walked past. That was the honest truth of it, the truth he never told anyone, the truth that lived in the private part of him where the less flattering things were stored. He almost walked past. He was 12 years old and it was 7:43 in the morning, and he had 17 minutes before the gates at Meridian Primary locked, and the alien girl in the wreckage of the bus shelter was not his problem. He slowed down anyway. He didn't know what species she was. That wasn't unusual. The resettlement had brought so many alien families into the district that his mother jokingly called their neighborhood the Galactic Quarter, and Kale had learned to recognize maybe a dozen distinct morphologies by sight, but there were dozens more he couldn't name. This girl was tall for her age, he guessed, with a narrow thorax and 6 limbs total, 2 upper, 4 lower, and a cranial structure that swept back in elegant ridges the color of old bone. Her skin, where it showed, was the pale silver gray of river stone. She had eyes the deep amber of creek water in autumn, and right now those eyes were fixed on the ground between her folded knees, and she wasn't looking at anything. Her mobility frame, the exoskeletal support structure that wrapped her lower 4 limbs and her spine in a lattice of articulated composite, had been clipped by something falling from the ruined shelter roof. A corner beam, maybe, or part of the signage strut. The left rear support was bent 40 degrees from true. The lower left actuator was making a sound like a paper clip being pulled slowly through a padlock. She wasn't moving. She wasn't crying either, which somehow made it worse. Kale stopped. He stood there for 3 seconds, which felt like longer. He ran the math the way 12-year-olds run math, fast and imprecise and loaded with self-interest. He was going to be late. He didn't know her. She probably wasn't his problem in about 17 different ways he could barely articulate. Her family would come. Someone would come. The actuator made its small, ugly sound again. He said, "Can you stand?" She looked up. He hadn't been sure she'd heard him. He didn't know her auditory range, but her amber eyes found his face immediately and held it with an attention that felt more precise than human eye contact, less polite and more direct, like being scanned rather than seen. "The left posterior support is compromised," she said. Her voice was slightly resonant, like someone speaking into a clay vessel, but her standard was clean. "I have been calculating whether I can redistribute weight to the anterior pair. The mathematics suggest a 43% probability of a secondary collapse within 6 minutes of ambulation." Kale looked at the bent strut. He looked at the distance to school. He looked at his watch. "So probably no," he said. "Probably no." He set his bag down. He crouched beside the damaged frame and looked at it the way he looked at things he was planning to try to fix, not with expertise. He had no expertise, but with the honest attention of someone who was actually looking. The bent strut had been struck near its lower joint. The joint itself was still intact. The bend wasn't in the actuator rod. It was in the housing around it. He didn't know enough about her species biomechanics to know what the frame was compensating for. He didn't know enough about the frame itself to know what was load-bearing and what was redundant. He knew one thing. If he put his shoulder under her left side and she put her weight on him instead of the damaged strut, the strut didn't need to hold anything. "I'm Kale," he said. She looked at him for another moment with that precise alien attention. "I am Sieve. My designation is Sieve Thaloran. You may use Sieve." "Okay, Sieve. I'm going to put my shoulder here." He indicated the junction of the frame and her lower left thorax. "And you're going to walk and I'm going to take the weight from that side. It's going to be slow. Is that okay?" Steve regarded him without any of the particular expressions he'd learned to read as uncertainty or gratitude or surprise. Whatever was on her face was something else, something he didn't have a translation for yet. Then she said, "That is an inefficient solution." "Yes," he agreed. "Do you have a better one?" She didn't answer, which was, he figured, its own kind of answer. It took them 41 minutes to walk the 6-minute route to Meridian Primary. Cale arrived late. He got a note sent home. Steve arrived at school for the first time with silver-gray mud on the lower struts of her frame and her amber eyes carrying something Cale still couldn't name, and the gate guard logged her registration and let her through without a word. He didn't think much about it after that. The walk had happened. It was done. He had an apology note to give to his mother and a history quiz he'd missed the review session for. He filed the morning under unusual and moved on. What he didn't know, what he had no means of knowing, was that a recording relay embedded in the collapsed transit shelter, installed by the Resettlement Authority to monitor pedestrian safety, had been running the entire time. The second morning, Steve was waiting at the end of Cale Street. He almost stopped walking again, for different reasons. She was standing, carefully, with her weight distributed across the 3 functional support points of her frame, at the corner where his street met Yellow Lane, and when he came out of his front door, she turned her precise amber attention toward him and waited. He walked to her. He didn't say anything about it being surprising. She didn't say anything about it being a plan she'd made. They started walking. "Your route takes 11 minutes at standard human adolescent pace," Steve said, approximately 30 seconds in. "Usually 7 if I'm not carrying much. I will require approximately 22 minutes until my frame is repaired. The technician appointment is in 4 days." "Okay. I wanted to inform you so you could adjust your departure time." Cale thought about this. He thought about the fact that she had clearly already run the math, had clearly already decided something, had chosen this corner and this time, and had communicated it to him as information rather than request. She wasn't asking. She was telling him the variables and leaving the conclusion to him. It was, he realized, the most honest way he'd ever been offered something. "I'll leave 12 minutes earlier," he said. That would produce adequate margin. They walked. He learned over those 4 days before the technician appointment various things about Steve Thaloran. She was 11 years old by her species calendar, which translated to somewhere between 9 and 13 in human years, depending on which developmental metric you used. Her family were Orcs, one of the 3 Thal subspecies that had been resettled in the district following the collapse of the Thal home system's primary moon, a disaster Cale had learned about in school but which had felt abstract until he was walking beside someone for whom it was not abstract at all. She had 2 parents and 1 elder sibling who attended secondary school across the district. She had been using a mobility frame since birth. Her condition was structural. Something in the Thal developmental architecture that the Oring clade carried at higher frequency than the other clades. Something the medical summaries described in technical language that Cale only partially understood. She was one of 6 Thal children enrolled in the district school system this term. She was the only one who walked. The other 5 were collected and delivered by family transport, which was authorized and normal and made perfect sense given the distances and the logistics. Steve's family transport had broken down the week before. Her parents both worked early shifts. The repair timeline had aligned with the collapsed transit shelter in a way that had put Steve on a wet curb at 7:43 in the morning, with a bent actuator making small, ugly sounds and nowhere particular to go. Cale learned all of this not from Steve directly, but from the combinations of things she said, and things she didn't say, assembled over 4 slow morning walks. She was not evasive. She answered direct questions with direct answers, but she didn't narrate her own situation with the kind of explanatory self-disclosure that Cale's human friends used. She communicated the minimum necessary. He found that he had to actually pay attention. He did. He wasn't sure when it became something he did deliberately rather than by accident. The technician came. The frame was repaired. Steve's family transport came back online. The fifth morning, Cale left 12 minutes early anyway and went to the corner of Yellow Lane. Steve was there. Neither of them mentioned it. The other children noticed by the third week. This was not surprising. Meridian Primary drew from 7 blocks in every direction, and the morning walk was a sociological event. The same clumps of children moving in the same loose formations every day, and any deviation from the established pattern was visible and notable and subject to comment. A human boy walking with a thal girl, slowly, adjusting his pace, and sometimes his shoulder to the calibrations of her repaired frame, was a deviation. The first time it was just looks. The second time it was a comment from 2 boys in his year whose names he knew, but who he'd never been close to, something about whether he needed a leash for his pet, something that was meant to be funny in the particular way that 12-year-old cruelty masquerades as humor. Cale didn't respond. He'd learned by then that Steve didn't find it efficient to respond to things that didn't require a response. He was trying on the habit. But the third time, when a girl 2 years above him asked why he was always with the broken alien, Steve answered before he could. "I am not broken," Steve said. Her voice had that clay vessel resonance and her amber eyes did their precise thing, which up close was slightly unnerving if you weren't used to it. The frame sustains a recurring misalignment in the left posterior support that requires monthly calibration. This is a known maintenance requirement. It does not indicate structural failure. The girl stared at her, then stared at Cale. Cale shrugged. "She's not wrong." They walked on. Behind them, he heard the girl say something to her friends that he couldn't quite make out. He didn't turn around. Steve said quietly as they turned onto the school street, "Thank you." "For what? You handled it." "For not turning around." He thought about that for a moment. He thought about how she would have known precisely whether he turned or not. He thought about the weight that simple piece of information carried, that she was watching, that it mattered to her whether he looked back, whether he second-guessed, whether he showed her by the direction of his body that he was uncertain about being here. "I wasn't going to turn around," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I said thank you." The fourth week, his mother said, "Tell me about the girl you walk with." He was eating cereal. It was early. He was not fully awake. "Her name's Steve. She's thal. She's in year 6. Mrs. Bellamy mentioned her. Said you're always late checking into the school system because you arrive right at the gate instead of early. We take longer. Her frame is slower." His mother was quiet for a moment. She was a small woman with dark eyes and the kind of stillness that wasn't absence but was actually a very focused presence, and she had a habit of watching him when he didn't know she was watching. "Is she a friend?" He thought about it. He thought about what the word meant, its specific weight, the things it implied and didn't imply. He thought about Steve's precise amber attention and her way of stating variables and leaving conclusions to him and her thank you for the thing he didn't do. "Yeah," he said, "I think so." His mother nodded once. She went back to her coffee. He went back to his cereal. She was standing in the doorway when he left, and she watched him go, and he didn't turn around because he was thinking about something Steve had said. He didn't know that she was crying quietly in the kitchen while he walked down the street at 7:31 in the morning to meet an alien girl at the corner of Yellow Lane. He found out much later. She told him it wasn't sadness. She wasn't fully sure what it was. The fifth week, a new family moved into the district. They arrived without announcement. Or rather, they arrived with the kind of announcement that only the people who need to know get told, which meant that everyone else found out via the specific method of suddenly noticing that 3 black vehicles without visible registration were parked outside the old Resettlement Authority Annex building on the corner of Meridian and 5th. and that the vehicles had a particular quality about them that was difficult to name but could be loosely described as authority. The kind that doesn't explain itself. Cale noticed them on the Tuesday morning walk. He didn't say anything. Steve noticed them too. He could tell by the slight recalibration of her attention, the way her amber eyes passed over the vehicles and held for 3 seconds longer than they would have held on something unremarkable. "Those are not local administration vehicles," she said. "No," he agreed. "The configuration suggests interstellar registry." He looked at the vehicles again. He didn't know enough to confirm or deny this. What would IR be doing here? Steve was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she said, which meant she had hypotheses but considered them unlikely enough not to voice. They walked on. The school day happened. The black vehicles were gone by afternoon, and by Thursday there were no visible signs that anything had been different on Tuesday morning, and Cale filed it the way he filed things that were interesting but unresolvable and got on with the rest of the week. Thursday morning, Friday morning, the weekend, which he spent with his father at a regional football game, eating bad food and yelling at poor refereeing decisions, and coming home on the bus with his voice half gone and his father's arm around his shoulders, and the easy warmth of that specific kind of tired that comes from a day well wasted. Sunday night, his mother sat on the edge of his bed after he'd gotten under the covers, and she said, not quite casually, "I got a call from the school today." "About what?" "About Steve." He sat up a little. "Is she okay?" His mother looked at him for a moment. She had her careful look on, the one she used when she was deciding how much to tell him. "She's fine. They wanted to know if you'd be willing to continue walking with her, officially, as something the school facilitates with a small provision for your time." She paused. "You'd be compensated, some sort of youth community credit." He stared at her. "She asked for this." "Her family requested it, through the school." He thought about Steve at the corner of Yellow Lane, waiting. He thought about her giving him the variables, 22 minutes, 4 days, and leaving the conclusion to him. He thought about the way she'd said thank you for the thing he didn't do. "Tell them no to the compensation," he said. His mother was very still for a moment. "Cale. Tell them I'm doing it because she's my friend, not because I'm getting paid." He lay back down. "And tell them I'll keep doing it, just as a thing I do." His mother sat there for another few seconds. He heard her exhale. Then she kissed the top of his head and got up and left, and he stared at the ceiling for a while before he fell asleep. He didn't know, staring at the ceiling, that the call had not been from the school. He didn't know that the school had been a relay point, a careful anonymizing layer between the actual origin of the inquiry and his mother's telephone. He didn't know that the interstellar registry vehicles had not been a routine administrative visit, or that the file flagged by the resettlement authorities' pedestrian safety recording relay was now attached to a document that had been read by people much further away than the district offices. He fell asleep thinking about Thursday morning, and whether Steve would have anything interesting to say about the regional football scores, and whether she'd find it as funny as he hoped that his father had yelled, that referee needs his visual cortex recalibrated, at a bad offside call, which was, as far as Cale could tell, the most Steve-like thing his father had ever said. The 6th week was when everything changed. It started ordinary. Cale met Steve at 7:31. They walked. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of autumn cold that had teeth without being cruel, and Steve had a new outer layer on some kind of thermal material that layered over her upper thorax and her frame both, a muted silver that matched her skin exactly. "Is that new?" he asked. "My elder sibling gave it to me. They said it was becoming cold enough to require additional thermal management." "Does your species feel cold differently?" "Our tolerance threshold is lower than human baseline. Temperatures that humans describe as comfortable cold, we experience as physiologically taxing." Kale looked at her sideways. Why didn't you say something? We could have gone faster. We cannot go faster. Okay, but you've been cold for weeks and you didn't mention it. Steve considered this with that precise quality she brought to things that weren't immediately clear to her. It did not impede function, she said finally. Steve, he stopped. She stopped too and turned those amber eyes on him. Tell me when you're cold or when something is wrong. You don't have to just manage everything by yourself. She looked at him for 3 seconds, 4, the precise attention doing its scan not see thing. Humans frequently state that they will help, she said, and then do not. He held her gaze or what passed for it with thal eye contact, which was slightly different, slightly more frontal. I know, he said. I'm not going to be perfect at it, but I'm asking you to tell me anyway. Another beat, then she said, acknowledged. They kept walking. They were on the last block before the school gate when the cars appeared. Not the interstellar registry black vehicles. Those had been anonymous, institutional. These were something else. 3 of them also black, but with a surface quality that was wrong in a way Kale couldn't immediately quantify. They seemed to absorb light differently than painted metal should. They were parked in a precise formation outside the school that suggested intent rather than coincidence. People were standing by them. Not people. He revised this immediately, because only some of them were people. 2 were human in plainclothes, with the specific quality of controlled stillness that meant security or military. The others were something Kale had never seen before. Tall, so tall they had to be well over 2 meters, with a physical architecture that suggested weight and presence far beyond their actual dimensions, armored in something that was not quite material. A layered field effect, maybe, the kind he'd seen in documentary footage of high-level diplomatic escorts. Steve had gone very still beside him. Steve, he started. Do not be alarmed, she said. Her voice was doing something unusual. There was a harmonic in it, a resonance beneath the clay vessel tone that he hadn't heard before. I know who this is. Who? She didn't answer immediately. She was looking at the formation of vehicles and guards and the space between them, and she was doing her calculation thing. And Kale had learned enough about her by now to know that when she went this quiet she wasn't disengaging. She was processing something large. Walk normally, she said, please. He walked normally. She walked beside him, her frame making its small, precise sounds on the pavement, her thermal layer catching the autumn light. They approached the school gate. The security personnel noted their approach. Kale felt it, the attention of people trained to track movement, but they didn't intercept. And then the space between 2 of the light-absorbing vehicles opened up, and a woman walked through it. Except woman wasn't the right word, and Kale knew it immediately and completely in the particular way that you know certain things without being able to explain why you know them. She was thal, the bone-ridged cranial structure, the silver-gray skin, the 6-limbed architecture. But she was thal the way a river is water and an ocean is also water, and these 2 things are related but are not even slightly the same thing. She was ancient. Not fragile ancient, but accumulated ancient, the way mountains are old, carrying the weight of time as mass and authority rather than as damage. She wore something that was not clothing but served as clothing, layers of deep indigo with structural elements that Kale didn't know the words for. She moved without a frame, without any apparent assistance, with the particular unhurried certainty of someone who has never in their life needed to calculate whether they could afford to be slow. Her eyes were amber like sieves, but older, deeper, layered with something that amber alone didn't cover. She was looking at Steve. Steve had stopped walking. Her frame had locked into its braced position, which Kale had only seen her do once before, when she'd had to wait longer than expected for something, and needed to rest without sitting. She was standing with absolute stillness, and her amber eyes were fixed on the approaching woman and her breathing. He could hear it slightly, in the way he'd learned to read her through small physical signals, had gone deep and slow. The woman stopped 4 feet away. She looked at Steve for a long moment. Then she looked at Kale. He met her gaze. He didn't know what else to do. She was terrifying in the way that purely dignified things are sometimes terrifying, not because they threaten harm, but because they carry such density of presence that you become acutely aware of your own small size. But he was Steve's friend, and he was standing next to her, and he wasn't going to turn around. The woman said something in Thal. He didn't understand it. The resonance of her voice was extraordinary. He felt it more than heard it, a vibration at the base of the sternum. Steve responded, also in Thal. Her voice had the harmonic in it again, deeper now. The woman looked at Kale again. Then in Standard, in a voice that carried the same vibration and also somehow sounded like a decision being made. You are the child who walks with her. It wasn't a question. He answered anyway. Yes. Every day. Yes. She looked at him for a long time. Thal eye contact, he had learned, was not polite disengagement. It was actual assessment, actual measuring, and she was measuring him now with the full weight of whatever she was and whatever she'd seen in however many years of seeing things. Do you know what she is? The woman asked. Kale looked at Steve. Steve was looking at him. Her amber eyes had something in them that he still didn't have a full name for, but that was related to the look she'd given him when she'd said thank you for not turning around. She's Steve Thaloran, he said. She's 11 years old, she's in year 6. She's better at math than anyone I know. Her frame has a left posterior support that needs monthly calibration. She finds it annoying when she has to explain things twice. He paused. She's my friend. The woman was very still. Then she made a sound, not quite a word, more like a word's meaning without its shape, and looked back at Steve. They spoke again in Thal, longer this time. Kale stood and waited, and he watched Steve's face doing things he could mostly read now. The slight variation in how her cranial ridges sat that meant she was surprised. The particular set of her upper limbs that meant she was working through something difficult. The amber light in her eyes going soft in a way he'd seen exactly once before, which was the day she'd told him about the moon collapse, and had then looked away and been quiet for a full minute before continuing. When they finished, the woman turned back to Kale. She said, I am Steve's grandmother. Oh, he said. I was unable to visit when her family arrived. I have come now. She paused. I wish to see the district, to see the school, to see who my granddaughter walks with. He nodded. He wasn't sure what else to do. I have also, she said, with a careful deliberateness, come to observe a situation that was brought to my attention through official channels. Something shifted in the air. Not physically, but the security personnel were doing something different with their stillness, and the two human plainclothes individuals had changed their angle of attention. Kel felt it the way you feel a room's mood shift. What situation? He said. The treatment of resettled families in this district. She said it with the precision of someone who chooses their phrasing with full awareness of its weight. There have been reports, formal complaints, incidents involving children in transit and at educational institutions. The Interstellar Registry has been monitoring for several months. She paused again. And there is also a particular record, brought to attention 6 weeks ago, of a human child and a Thal child in a collapsed transit shelter, and a choice that took 41 minutes. Kale was quiet. That record was brought to my attention, she said, because I am the person who holds responsibility for these things. Her amber eyes, ancient, deep, layered, were still measuring him. Do you know what I am? He thought about the vehicles, the guards, the field effect armor, the way people had moved when she'd walked between the cars. No, he said honestly. Steve said quietly from beside him, her designation is Lyrath Thal Sovanoran Prime. She said it carefully, like laying something fragile down. She is the hereditary chair of the Thal Confederacy Council. He looked at the woman. He looked at her ancient amber eyes and her accumulated presence and her layers of indigo. Oh, he said again. Yes, the woman said, and there was something at the edge of her voice, not quite warmth, not quite humor, but its thal equivalent, some resonance he didn't have a human word for. Oh. What happened in the following weeks was the kind of thing that Cale only partially understood as it was happening and understood more fully later, in pieces. The way you understand a large painting, you have to step back many times from different distances before you can see the whole thing. The Galactic Queen, which was approximately but not exactly what Lyrath Thal Sovenoran Prime was, it was more complicated than that. It was a hereditary council seat that held both political and what could loosely be called spiritual authority over 12 Thal-affiliated systems, had come to the district with a specific purpose. The monitoring that the Interstellar Registry had been doing was real, and the situation it had been monitoring was real. Resettled Thal families had been experiencing systematic difficulties in the district. Not catastrophic difficulties, not violence, but the accumulated weight of small misalignments between a school system not redesigned for their children, and a transit infrastructure not retrofitted for their frames, and a social environment that had absorbed the idea of alien neighbors without fully absorbing the actual neighbors. She had the authority to make things change. And she did make things change. He learned about some of it from his mother, who heard from the district council. He learned about some of it from his teacher, who told the class that several accessibility modifications were being made to the school infrastructure. He learned about some of it from Sieve, obliquely, in the way Sieve communicated oblique things, in variables rather than conclusions, in the gaps between what she said and what she didn't say. What Lyrath Thal Sovenoran Prime said to him privately, in a meeting that was brief and formal, and that Cale attended with his mother, and that he found simultaneously the most intimidating and the most strangely straightforward conversation of his 12-year life, was this. I will tell you something that may be difficult to receive. What you did was small. He blinked. His mother made a very slight sound. Walking with a child to school, it is a small act. She held his gaze with those ancient amber eyes. But the universe is composed of small acts. The difference between a world that functions and one that does not is not made by great moments, though great moments exist. It is made by small moments repeated, by what people do when the act is inconvenient, by whether they turn around. She paused. The recording relay showed us what you did. It also showed us who else was on that street that morning. 17 other individuals passed the shelter in the 14 minutes before you stopped. I am told you nearly continued walking yourself. I almost did, he said. Yes, but you did not. She looked at him for a long moment. I want to tell you why this particular small act mattered, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was witnessed at a particular time, by a particular instrument, and sent to a particular desk, and came to me at a moment when I was deciding how to proceed with this district situation. Whether to intervene forcefully and quickly, which produces certain outcomes, or to work through existing social structures and their capacity for self-correction, which produces different outcomes. She folded her upper limbs, a Thal gesture he'd learned to read as something between deliberateness and emphasis. The record was an argument for the second approach. He sat with this for a moment. So I helped, he said, by almost not helping. You helped, she said, by being human in a very specific way. By not being purely rational. She said it without any condescension, as a statement of fact about a species she'd apparently studied. A purely rational actor, calculating costs and benefits at 7:43 in the morning with 17 minutes before a school gate locks, does not stop. You are not a purely rational actor. This is one of the things about your species that I have found, over a very long time, to be its most significant characteristic. He didn't know what to say to that. He sat in a chair in a room in the district administration building, and he was 12 years old, and the hereditary council chair of 12 systems was talking to him about the irrational persistence of humans, and he couldn't quite locate which of the many things he was feeling was the dominant one. His mother's hand found his arm under the table. He put his hand over hers. "I want to also tell you one more thing," Lyreth said. "My granddaughter, she has many qualities. Some of them are remarkable even by Thal standards, but she has, since her family came here, been, I will use the accurate word, lonely. Thal children do not describe loneliness easily. We do not have a word for it that translates neatly into standard, but the state exists, and she was in it." She looked at him with the full weight of those accumulated years. She is no longer in it. Cale looked at the table for a second. Then he looked up. "She's good at math," he said. "Like, really good. She helped me figure out why I kept getting wrong answers on my geometry homework, and she didn't make me feel dumb about it. She just showed me the part I was missing." Lyreth looked at him for a long moment. Then she made the sound again, the not quite word that was a word's meaning without its shape. "Yes," she said, "she is very good at mathematics." The district changed after that. Not all at once, not perfectly, not without friction, but it changed. The school added 3 accessibility modifications in the first month, not because the Galactic Queen demanded it, but because the Galactic Queen had made a formal observation that the district's educational infrastructure was misaligned with its current population, and that observation had weighed in ways that previous complaints hadn't. The Transit Authority retrofitted 14 shelter locations with frames-compatible access within 90 days. The Resettlement Authority brought in a specialist team to review accommodation protocols for 31 alien families in the district. Cale's mother was asked to participate in a community advisory panel that the district council convened to assist with the process. She went. She took it seriously. She came home from the meetings and told Cale things about what she'd learned, and he listened, and sometimes he'd relay the relevant variables to Sieve the next morning. And Sieve would occasionally say things in return that Cale would then take home to his mother. And it became, over time, a particular kind of chain of communication that neither he nor Sieve nor his mother had formally organized, but that worked. Sieve's frame needed its monthly calibration. It always would. Her condition was structural, not progressive, which meant she was stable but also meant she would always need the frame's support. The left posterior actuator was the maintenance point. It would always be slightly more vulnerable than the other components. She'd explained the mechanism to him in more detail than was probably necessary for someone who wasn't an engineer, but he'd asked, and she'd answered. He knew enough about her frame by the end of autumn term that he could tell when the calibration was running slightly long, and it was time to remind her to make the appointment. She found this useful. She would never have said it was useful, but he could tell from the variables she gave him on the days he reminded her. The second month brought its own complications. It started with a homework assignment that Cale kept getting wrong. Not completely wrong, just consistently wrong. The same error in the same type of problem, geometry again. The thing where the angles were supposed to add to one thing and kept adding to something slightly different in his working. He'd done it 6 times on the same problem set and gotten 6 slightly different wrong answers, which was worse than getting the same wrong answer 6 times because it meant the error wasn't in his arithmetic. It was in his understanding of the underlying principle, and he didn't know which principle. He told Sieve about it on the walk, not because he thought she could help, but because he was frustrated and they were walking and talking about things was what happened on the walk. She asked him to describe the problem. He described it. She asked 2 clarifying questions. He answered them. She was quiet for approximately 1 block. Then she said, "You are treating the interior angle as though it exists in isolation. It does not. It is a function of the relationship between the 2 lines that create it. You are calculating the angle as a fixed property rather than as a relational one." He stared at the pavement. He ran through the last problem in his head with that distinction in place. The numbers settled immediately into the right answer. "Oh," he said, "you had the process correct. The conceptual frame was wrong. Why didn't the teacher just say that? I do not know. It is possible they assume the conceptual frame is already established and are teaching process over it. He thought about this. Does that happen with your teachers too? Frequently. Teachers often teach to the median comprehension level of the class. If your comprehension is above or below median, the teaching may not map to your specific gap. She considered this for a moment. I experience this regularly in the other direction. My teachers often over-explain procedural steps that I have already integrated. He hadn't thought about it from that direction before, that being ahead was its own version of being mismatched. Does it bother you? It is inefficient. I have adapted by using the procedural time to work on extensions of the problem. Do your teachers know you're doing that? Some have asked. I explain that I have completed the primary task and am extending. Most accept this. A slight pause. 2 have told me to wait for the rest of the class. He felt something go quiet and flat in him, the particular flatness that comes before irritation when you recognize an injustice and are too young to have a good name for what you're feeling. That's stupid. It may be. It may also be that classroom management requires a degree of synchronization that individual advancement complicates. Her voice was neutral. I have not determined which it is in those specific cases. He found he appreciated this about her, that she held multiple explanations open instead of collapsing immediately to the most favorable or unfavorable one. He was trying to learn it, with mixed results. He got a good mark on the geometry homework. He told her the next morning. She said expected in the tone that was the thal equivalent of being pleased without performing it. The complications of the second month were not only about homework. There was a group of older students, 3 of them, all in year 8, who had decided that Kale's morning walks with Steve were a target, not in any dramatic way. In the low grade, sustained way that certain kinds of cruelty operate. Comments at the school entrance, small blockades of the pavement that required them to reroute, one incident where someone's foot connected with the lowest strut of Steve's frame in what could have been accidental but wasn't. After that last incident, Steve's frame ran a self-diagnostic. The strut was fine, the kick had been more aggressive than precise, and the composite material had absorbed it without damage. Steve had not fallen. She had steadied herself with 3 seconds of absolute concentration and then continued walking as though nothing had happened. Kale had turned around. For the first time since the very beginning, he'd turned around. The 3 older students were watching. One of them was smiling. He looked at them for 3 seconds. He looked at their faces. He memorized them, not because he had a plan, but because something in him required it. Then he turned back around and walked with Steve to the gate. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't what?" "Whatever you're planning." "I'm not planning anything." "You have the face of someone constructing a plan." He hadn't known she could read his expressions. He hadn't thought about whether she could. He made a note to himself to think about this later and then said, "I reported it to Mr. Ockhaffer this morning." She was quiet for a moment. "When?" "Before I met you, I went in early." Another pause. "You didn't mention this." "I didn't want you to tell me not to." He felt her amber gaze on the side of his face, that precise attention. "I would not have told you not to. I would have told you that formal reporting often produces limited outcomes." "I know, I reported it anyway." He paused. "Because it needed to be in the record even if nothing happens. That's what my mom says. You report things so the record exists." Steve was quiet again for longer this time. "Your mother is pragmatic. She says it's just accurate." The formal report produced, as Steve had predicted, limited immediate outcomes. Mr. Ockhaffer spoke to the year 8s. The 3 students were not in evidence for 3 days. On the 4th day they were back, and the comments were more careful now. Nothing that could be specifically reported, just the ambient texture of being unwelcome. Kale's mother, when he told her, because he'd started telling her most things by now, something that had happened gradually without him deciding to do it, said, "Keep reporting. Every time. Nothing happens. The record accumulates," she said. "Records matter more than they seem to at the time." He thought about the recording relay in the collapsed transit shelter. He thought about a file that had traveled a long distance to a desk where someone was making a decision about a district. "Okay," he said. He kept reporting. Steve, he learned later, had also been keeping a log: dates, times, descriptions, the precise language used, the precise actions taken. She showed it to him once without preamble, during a lunch period in November, producing a small data device and opening it to a list that was 3 pages long and formatted with the exactness of someone who had understood from the beginning that documentation was a form of self-defense. "Steve," he said, looking at the list, why didn't you show me this before?" "I was unsure of its utility in your specific reporting context. The school system accepts verbal reports from students. I did not know if a supplementary document from a student would carry weight or be dismissed." "We should give this to Mr. Okafor." She considered this. "He may dismiss it as overcomplicated. Or he might not." He looked at her. "Can I print a copy?" She printed a copy. He gave it to Mr. Okafor, who looked at it with an expression that passed through several phases before landing on something that was not quite embarrassed but was adjacent to it. Mr. Okafor took it to the deputy head. The 3-year 8s were spoken to again, this time more formally. After that, the incidents stopped. Not completely, not immediately, but they decreased in frequency and then in intensity, and then, by the beginning of December, they had receded to the point where Kale stopped tracking the specific texture of each morning for signs of them. He told Steve. "The documentation was the deciding factor," she said. "Probably. That and the formal record from my mom's complaint to the district office." "Your mother complained to the district office?" "Last week, she said it needed to be documented at a level above the school." He paused. "She asked me first. I said yes." Steve walked for half a block. "Your mother is very systematic." "She learned it from my grandmother, apparently. Grandma said you always document everything, always one level up from where the problem is, always before you need it." He thought about this. "I think she would have liked you." "Would have." "She died before I started at Meridian. Cancer. My mom still talks about her like she's in the next room sometimes." Steve was quiet for a long time after that. The long quiet that meant she was working through something significant. He didn't fill it with talking. Eventually she said, "I have not experienced loss of that kind, of a primary family member." "It's hard," he said simply. "I know this in the abstract, I don't know it in the specific." Another pause. "I think about the moon collapse sometimes. My parents speak of it carefully. There were members of our extended clan who were lost. I did not know them, but the way my parents speak of them suggests that they carry a weight that is different from ordinary sadness." "Yeah," he said, "it is." They walked the last block in a quiet that was not uncomfortable, but was the kind of silence that holds more weight than words. When they reached the gate, Steve stopped for a moment before going in. "Kale." "Yeah. I will remember what you said about your grandmother." She said it in the particular flat tone that was not absence of feeling. "I think she sounds correct about the documentation." He understood that this was the most Steve way possible of saying, "I heard you. I'm keeping it." "She was," he said. "She really was." In November, he asked Steve what the moon had been like. They were walking back from school. She had taken to walking home with him on the days when her family transport was running late, which was more days than not as the weather worsened. And the question came out in the way questions sometimes come out when you've been quietly holding them for a while without deciding to ask. And then you're talking and the right gap appears and the question emerges into it. Steve didn't answer immediately. She walked for 2 full minutes, which he had learned to measure by the rhythm of her frame on the pavement, before she spoke. It was cold, she said. Cold the way space is cold, which is different from the way this street is cold. Not a temperature that can be measured in the same scale. She paused. The visual memory I have of it is from recordings. I was born here in the district, but my parents showed me recordings of the homestead. What did it look like? The surface was pink, not the pink of Earth's sunsets, a heavier pink, more mineral than atmospheric. Low gravity, so the structures my clan built were tall and very narrow, built for lightness rather than load-bearing. You could jump twice your own height in standard gravity equivalents. Her frame made its small, rhythmic sounds. My elder sibling remembers it. They were 4 years old when we were resettled. They remember the smell of it, which they say was, I don't have a human translation for the word they use. The closest approximation is something between the smell of cold stone and the smell of something living that you cannot see. Kale walked and listened. My sibling says they miss it in the way you miss something that doesn't exist anymore, not the way you miss something that is somewhere else, because it is gone. The moon is still there, it did not collapse entirely. The disaster was in the atmospheric systems and the seismic chain it triggered, not in the physical body, but the homesteads are gone. The community is gone. The thing that was there is not there anymore. She paused. I do not miss it. I only know it from recordings. But I miss missing it sometimes, I think. She said the last part quietly, like she was checking if the sentence was right as she said it. I miss that there is something my family carries that I cannot fully share with them. He thought about his grandmother. He thought about loss that was yours and loss that you inherited and the difference between them. That sounds really hard, he said. It is a kind of loneliness, she said. The loneliness of not having shared the thing that shaped the people you love. She walked for another few steps. I did not know I could describe it until this moment. You can describe most things, he said. I usually describe things that are external, variables and mechanisms. She was quiet for a moment. This is different. Yeah. They walked the rest of the way home without talking much. At the corner of Yellow Lane, she said, Thank you for asking. Any time, he said. He meant it. He wasn't sure she knew he meant it in the particular way he meant it, not as a courtesy, but as a statement of ongoing availability, an open channel. But she looked at him with those amber eyes for a long moment, and he thought she might. He went home. He told his mother some of it, not all, the parts that were his to share. His mother listened with her particular quality of focused stillness, and when he finished she sat with it for a while and then said, She's teaching you things. We teach each other things, he said. His mother looked at him for a moment. Then she smiled, which wasn't something she did frequently or casually, and which carried weight for exactly that reason. Yes, she said. You do. One morning in December, when the cold had real teeth and she was wearing the silver thermal layer and he was wearing 3 things and still felt the wind, he asked her, Is it different from before? She understood the question without needing him to specify what it was about. Define different. School, the district, here. He gestured loosely at the street, the shelter that had been retrofitted, the morning commute that now took 18 minutes instead of 22 because the pavement modifications made her frame run slightly more efficiently. All of it. Steve considered this for a full minute, which was long even for her. He walked beside her and waited. It is different in the ways that can be measured, she said finally. Infrastructure, access. Response time from administrative systems, those have changed. She paused. It is also different in ways that are less easily measured. Another pause. The teachers address me differently than they did in September. How so? As though I am expected to succeed, rather than expected to require management. She said this with a particular flatness that wasn't absence of feeling but was its thal equivalent, the emotion too layered to simplify into expression. I do not know how to quantify the difference, but it is present. He thought about that for a block and a half. Then he said, "Steve, you know you were going to be good at stuff regardless, right? Like the teachers were wrong before, not less wrong now." She looked at him with the amber attention. "Yes. But it is easier to be good at things when the environment is calibrated to allow it." He thought about the 41-minute walk in September, the bent actuator, the wrong-angled strut, the calculation she'd run about the 43% probability of collapse. "Yeah," he said, "that makes sense." They walked the last block to the gate. The morning was clear and cold, and the sky had the particular quality of winter sky over a city, the light diffuse and pale. The gate was open. It was always open. It didn't close until 8:15, and they always arrived a few minutes before, but there was something about the gate being open and them walking through it together that Cale had, over the past months, started to think about as a small, complete thing. A unit. Each morning. They went through the gate. Cale, Steve said. "Yeah. I informed you in the second week that walking with a companion improved my efficiency by 22%. Due to psychological factors affecting stride regulation." He remembered. It had been delivered in the same way she delivered everything, variables and data, conclusion implicit. "Yeah. I underestimated the percentage," she said. He looked at her. Her amber eyes were forward on the school entrance, and her expression was doing its thou thing, which he had learned enough about by now to read approximately, imperfectly, with the honest uncertainty of someone working without a full dictionary. What was on her face was not a human expression. He didn't have a human translation for it. But he thought, with the particular knowledge of someone who had learned to pay attention to the gaps between what was said and what wasn't, that it was something adjacent to glad. "Good," he said. They went inside. In the spring, Lyrath Thal Sovenoran Prime sent Cale a letter. An actual letter, on physical material that he later learned was standard Thal formal correspondence medium. A pale gold-gray sheet that had a slight warmth to it, like something that had been in sunlight, and text in standard written by hand in the careful formal manner of someone who had been schooling themselves in a foreign script. He read it twice, standing in the kitchen at 7 in the morning with his cereal getting soggy. It said, "I have reviewed the outcome assessment for the district intervention. The measurable indicators show improvement across every monitored category. The advisory panel has been commended by the Resettlement Authority's regional office. But I wanted to write to you about something that is not in the outcome assessment. In the second week of the intervention, a Thal family in the northern portion of the district, not known to your family or to Steve's, began sending their child to school by foot rather than by family transport. This child also uses a mobility frame. She had not done this before. When asked why she had changed her approach, she said she had heard there was a boy who walked with someone. She is now part of a group of 4 children who walk together. The group includes 2 humans. I wanted you to know this, because the outcome assessments do not capture it, and because you should know that the thing you started on a morning in September is still, in some small ways, going." It was signed with a long Thal designation that he couldn't fully read, and then underneath, in slightly less formal handwriting, as if added as an afterthought, "My granddaughter tells me you still cannot do geometry without checking your work 3 times. She says this is acceptable. She says you check it carefully." Cale stood in his kitchen and read the letter twice, and felt the weight of the particular thing it was telling him, which was not about any one moment. Not the shelter, not the 41 minutes, not the meeting in the administrative building, not the open gate, but about what those moments connected to, and what they connected to after that, the chain of small things that was still moving through the district like a slow current through a still pond. One small act touching the water and the ring spreading outward, and the water in motion long after the act was done. He put the letter on the kitchen table. He ate his soggy cereal. He picked up his bag. His mother was in the doorway. She'd read the letter over his shoulder. He'd seen her face while he was reading and known she was there. "Mom," he said. "Yeah. I'm going to be late if I don't leave now." "I know." He went. He was at the corner of Yellow Lane by 7:31. Steve was there in her silver thermal layer, her frame calibrated to within its ideal range, her amber eyes finding his face with that precise attention. "You look like you are thinking about something," she said. "Yeah." "What?" He thought about it. He thought about the letter and the ring of ripples and the child he didn't know in the northern district and the small group of 4 walking together. He thought about 41 minutes and a bent actuator and a choice at 7:43 in the morning that he had almost not made. "Nothing specific," he said, "just that things connect." Steve considered this as they started walking. "Yes," she said after a moment, "they do." The morning was cold. The street was ordinary. 2 children walked together through the gap between the retrofitted shelter and the modified pavement, moving at the precise speed of an 11-year-old Thal girl with a well-calibrated frame, which was also the precise speed of a 12-year-old human boy who had, over the course of one autumn and most of a winter, learned to match his stride to something other than his own convenience. They walked. The gate was open. They went through. Later, months later, a full year after the September morning with the bent strut and the 41-minute walk, Kale would be asked to write a reflection for a district community newsletter. A small piece. A few paragraphs. Something about cross-species friendship or community integration, the editor had said, looking slightly embarrassed about the phrasing. He sat with the blank document for a long time. He thought about the actuator making its small, ugly sounds. He thought about his mother's hand on his arm under the table in the administrative building. He thought about Steve's list, 3 pages, precise and formatted and representing every small indignity logged and kept and carried, because she had understood before he did that the record mattered. He thought about a child in the northern district he had never met, who had heard there was a boy who walked with someone. He wrote, "I don't know how to explain the thing I learned this year in a way that doesn't sound smaller than it is, so I'm going to try to just say it directly. The thing I learned is that you don't have to understand everything about someone to decide to show up for them. You don't have to know their whole history or their biology or the name of the thing their family lost. You just have to notice when someone is sitting on a curb with a bent strut and decide, at 7:43 in the morning, that it's not nothing. I almost walked past. I think about that sometimes. Not with guilt. I figure guilt is only useful if it changes what you do next time, and I've already decided what I do next time. I think about it because it reminds me that the choice was real. It wasn't automatic. I made it, and I could have not made it, and that distinction matters. That's what makes it mean something. Steve taught me most of what I actually know about what I'm trying to say here. She's better at describing variables than I am, but she let me practice on the ones I could reach, and eventually I got better at it. She says I still check my geometry 3 times. She says that's acceptable. I think she's right about most things." He submitted it. The editor used it without changes, which surprised him. His mother read it and was quiet for a while and then said simply, "Good." Steve read it on the walk the day it was published. He'd printed it for her without mentioning it, slipped it in with the other things he was carrying. She read it while they walked, which was a thing she could do without breaking stride, and when she reached the end she folded it carefully and tucked it into a pocket in her thermal layer, close to her thorax. She didn't say anything for a full block. "Then this is accurate." "Thanks. The part about the geometry is accurate specifically." "I know." She walked. He walked. The gate came into view, open, the morning light catching the retrofitted entrance in a way that made the metal look briefly gold. "Kale," she said. "Yeah. I am glad you did not walk past." He looked at her, at those precise amber eyes and the bone-ridged structure and the silver-gray frame and the 11-year-old. 12 now, she'd had a birthday in October. He'd brought something small, and she'd received it with the Thal equivalent of delight, which was a very particular quality of stillness. Who had been sitting on a curb 8 months ago with nowhere particular to go. "Yeah," he said, "me too." They went through the gate. The morning continued, small and ordinary and connected to everything.